And so what's going to happen today is I'm going to pass over in a moment to Noliwe Delanon, who is going to be moderating the discussion, which will introduce the panelists for you. Just to let you know that Noliwe and Deborah Brewis and Vivek Sundararajan were our guest curators for the list this time. They brought the kind of expertise in helping us develop our Think List, which we called Think List Amplify. And Vivek and Deborah will be coming in later when we were doing the Q&A after we finished the kind of initial conversation with our panelists. And what I will say about the Q&A session, we want to kind of bring you into the conversation as well, right? It's not just so much a kind of experts and audience. We're all in this together very much. I think we all have interesting things to say about this topic. So we're very keen for you to kind of post thoughts and impressions and ideas during the chat. So please do that in the chat during the conversation as we're going along. If you have questions for the panelists or thoughts that you want to put down, put them in the chat, please do. And also, if you're happy to come on camera and ask a question or to make a point, then what we'd ask you to do is to raise your hand, not in real life, but raise your hand on the Zoom function. And then we'll try and pull in at least a couple of people so that we can see them be part of the conversation in a bit more of a real way. I should also let you know that we're recording the webinar today, so you will, if you do want to come on camera, we are assuming then that you're giving us permission to record you and then to play this back later when we put it online. So that's enough from me. I'm now going to go back into the background, which is where I'm very much better placed to be, and I'm going to pass the mic to Noliwe, who's going to be introducing our panelists and moderating the discussion. Noli, over to you.
Thank you so much, Andy, and thank you so much to all our participants in this webinar. So thank you for joining us to engage in this conversation. So I am Noliwe Delanon, based at Université Laval, and like Andy said, I'm going to be moderating this discussion on behalf of the team of curators who was composed of Deborah Brewis, Vivek Sundararajan, and myself. I just want to start with a bit of context on this webinar. Basically, what we had in mind was to start to engage on a journey with you all to discuss this very difficult and challenging issue of race, racialization, in the particular context of social media. And to do so, we wanted to hear from different positions in the field of responsible business. We also wanted to have some geographic diversity, but most importantly, I would say that we wanted to hear from very different perspectives. And the reasons for doing that are threefold. So basically, as academics, we know how important it is to hear from different perspectives. And so that's the first set of questions, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because they're not specific to what we're going to discuss today. But the second set of reasons has to do with well, the very issue that we're about to discuss, which is race, racialization, and think about the fact that the very idea of tackling those issues by putting up a Think List Amplified that is completely dedicated to racialized scholars has triggered very contrasted reactions. So we received a lot of enthusiasm, a lot, disproportionately, I would say. But we also received some skepticism from some nominees. Some were curious to hear more about what it means to be a racialized scholar. So we had some questions about that. But we also had a few criticisms, some people who thought that it might not be the best way to go to tackle those issues. So we thought that it was really, really important to hear from those different perspectives, or to hear at least from different perspectives in the context of this webinar. And finally, a third set of reasons for having a different perspective has to do with representativeness of the profiles of our nominees. Because, of course, it's a racialized only list. Nevertheless, we have scholars who address those issues of race and racialization through their work, through research and teaching. But we also have scholars who address them as citizens. They speak up as citizens on issues that matter to them related to race. Other scholars, they address the intersection of various forms of oppression. And finally, we also have nominees who do not address those issues in particular. They discuss different things, they communicate about other things, and yet they are racialized by society. So they remain racialized scholars. So all of this is kind of the portrait that we have of our nominees, and we wanted to make sure that we had a full conversation on all of this. So now I'm going to introduce our four panelists, and I'm going to do so in alphabetical order. So we're going to start with, and I am going to try my best to pronounce properly every name. So we have first Samer Abdelnour from University of Edinburgh. We have Angela Martinez from Loughborough of University London. We also have Courtney McLooney from Cornell, and finally Chinmay Tumbe from IIM Ahmedabad. So thank you so much to all of our expert panelists for accepting to share with us their thoughts on the wide issue of race and racialization. They're all also Think Less Amplify nominees, so thanks for that. And basically what we told them when we invited them is that we wanted to explore with them their experiences, the strategies, if any, that they've developed as racialized scholars working on responsible business to communicate on social media. So now let's get started. And I want to direct my first question maybe to Courtney, which is, my first question would be, what challenges have you faced in engaging on social media in a professional capacity, particularly around issues of race?
Yes. Thank you so much for the question, and thank you all again for inviting us to be here. Can everyone hear my audio okay? It's always hard to tell in these formats. So I would say the challenges with being a visible woman of color, visible Black woman in social media is anytime I post something having to do with Black social movements happening in the US, my research, any of that which tends to focus on Black professionals' experiences in the workplace, it not only invites conversations about the legitimacy and validity of my work, but also what we consider internet trolls. So people who sometimes are bots or are just anonymous people who like to express their very bigoted views. And I have unfortunately been targeted or harassed with that type of trolling behavior. Some very violent, some are more in jest, especially in our country. We've had very polarized political views as of late, very extreme racialized views over the past few years. My action or activity, I would say, on social media really increased following the Charlottesville activities that happened in August 2017. That was my first weekend as a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Virginia. And the use of social media really helped to amplify what was happening in the streets as people were protesting the removal of the statue, which led to violence and the death of Heather Heyer in the city. So I remember, using that as a news source to understand where I might be safe walking around Charlottesville that weekend, but also seeing just really violent and quite racist statements going on. And so that could be quite triggering to scholars of color who are visibly putting themselves and their work out there for public consumption. So I would say those have certainly been the most extreme challenges with doing this work on social media, is you can't control the audience necessarily or any type of response or feedback that's given to you.
Thank you so much, Courtney, for sharing that with us, because it reminds us how costly it can be to speak up on those issues, to research those issues. Maybe I feel like turning to Samer now, because on your bio, Samer, you have written Black Lives Matter, for example, and I wonder, when we hear what Courtney just said, why do you feel like it's important, Samer, to communicate about certain topics? What do you communicate about, and how do you deal with that in the particular context of social media?
Sure. Thanks so much for the question, and for Courtney to start us off, and also again to reiterate for Deborah, Vivek, Andy, and yourself for having us and hosting this talk. Yeah, so, I felt, I indeed put Black Lives Matter in my bio, and I think for me, it's an expression of solidarity, and it's also an expression of intersectional activism. Myself, a lot of the things that I will write about or tweet about have to do with issues surrounding the Black Lives Matter movement, at least at the moment, Indigenous struggles, and tensions around, for example, the recent pipeline conflict or fisheries in Halifax. But also a lot of what I put out is around issues of Palestine and Palestinians, and my own ethnic background. I'm born and raised in Canada. I'm Canadian, but also of Palestinian heritage and ethnicity. And for me, growing up in Canada, I learned about what it means to be Palestinian through contemporary Indigenous and Black American and Canadian, especially Black American struggles. And so one, develops their racialized identity in place intersectionally in that sense. And therefore, I think that also commands an intersectional solidarity. And for me, there are underlying issues, there are commonalities amongst these issues, there are differences in experiences and histories as well. But those are things that I tend to write about. In my own challenges, if I can just build on that, for me, there's always been a tension between having different communities. And a long time ago, I left Facebook because of this concern, this internalized, this kind of internalized regulation in some sense of what I can and cannot express for fear of, or anxieties around different communities, one being professional and one being, personal. And as I got socialized in academia as a PhD student, and more professional colleagues would join on Facebook and things like that, I found myself really feeling this tension. Part of that I've realized since moving to Europe many years ago is that in North America, especially, issues around Palestine and Palestinian solidarity, issues around activism around Black Lives Matter movement, and these issues are really incredibly polarized. And so there's a little bit more space. I'd like to talk a bit later about the closing space, but there's a little bit more space on social media to be a little bit more active and connect with others. But for people engaged in Palestinian solidarity, or Palestinian students and academics in North America, many have, there are quite a few examples and current ongoing examples of people being silenced, being put out of work. So, me being in Europe gives me some space, although there are challenges. And I think an example of, well, I'll stop there, but yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, Samar. But you've opened up very interesting avenues for us to dig into. So one of them, I want to ask Angela to jump in. Angela, so one of the things that Samar just told us is, well, he was concerned about trying to engage with different communities on social media. And you, Angela, if I'm not mistaken, you kind of manage different Twitter accounts for different communities. So how do you navigate that, and particularly, but not only, around issues of race or other forms of oppression that are centered in your work, in your research?
Thank you for the question, and I just want to echo the panelists. Thanks and appreciation for being offered the opportunity to talk about these things. And the points that they've made so far really resonate strongly with me and with the things that I wanted to bring to the table. So it's great that we're heading in this direction. It is true that I have lots of different social media accounts. I would expect, like, simply maybe because of my assumptions about the generation of the people who are on this panel, that a lot of us have grown up with social media, as social media itself has emerged. So when I first joined Twitter, for example, in I think 2009, and Facebook in 2006, I had no idea that I would one day be an academic who would be as responsible for the content that I put out into the world as academics are held to be. So I made a choice along the way to do my best to not accept any work-related colleagues into my Facebook space until they became friends, and then maybe I would allow that to happen. But I've come off Facebook for a lot of the reasons that Samer has said, because of the polarization, and I felt a lot of the distractions that were happening from me doing the work that I really wanted to do, which was outside of the Facebook space. Twitter is a little bit different. I started off with a Twitter account that was personal, that has my face attached to it, not my name, just the Twitter name. And as my activism and as my activities started to proliferate, I realized that Twitter seemed like a place where people came to an account for a particular kind of content. And so I started to canalize my content so that it was more suited to what I thought that set of audience members and followers were interested in regarding that account. However, I still was reluctant to put my face and my name to it because of the ways in which I feared some of the backlash that Courtney was talking about. And then, especially when I became an academic, I just decided I'm not going to have an account that links my face, my name, and my institution, because we know what we've seen in the past is that people have been targeted, silenced, both by their institution and by trolls and by even public figures on the web who the word I want to use is sick, like sicking a group of dogs onto somebody. So by tagging someone, a very influential person on Twitter can get hordes of their followers to harass people online. We've seen it happen. I'm thinking the Leslie Jones issue not very long ago, where she really had to shut down her whole account because of the violence and the vitriol that other Twitter users had told their Twitter followings to enact upon her. So all of those things are in my mind when I use Twitter. And so I prefer to be able to share the work that I want to share, retweet things without having to worry whether somebody's going to think that that's an endorsement, from a place of, less fear and hesitation. So the account that's been publicized on this Think list here, which is the Collective Bark Twitter, I think is a much more number one, appropriate place to share some of the insights and critiques and to retweet things that are for the community of higher education, anti-racist activists, scholar activists that interact with that account. But also I just feel more confident in none of us, I mean, there's multiple people in the collective, but as a collective, it's much harder to be targeted. And I feel that we're stronger if we speak from that united platform.
Thank you very much, Angela. So one thing that is very striking through all of your testimonies is how violent this environment is even for academics. I mean, we're extremely privileged members of society, and yet because of the kind of research that we do, or because of our very identity, sometimes we are predominantly targeted. So we can see that it's far from being a safe space by definition, the social media for racialized scholars, depending on what they do, what they say, or just who they are. So Chinmay, maybe I want to turn now to you and ask you, on social media, what do you feel is safe or difficult to talk about? What do you feel is important to communicate about? Can you share with us some of your experience on social media?
Sure, yeah. I think I was a reluctant latecomer to social media and now sort of addicted to it, especially Twitter and Instagram. But I think as we all know, social media is extremely democratic, which can potentially amplify any voice. which also means, as Courtney pointed out, you get trolls, you get all sorts of voices on you. And I think you need to develop a thick skin very fast if you want to, ride the social media wave, kind of ignore, not comment, not get bothered by everything that's been thrown out at you. I have so far, for example, not blocked anyone. I just choose to ignore. But I know a lot of people who block because after a point it kind of gets to you. And I know it's much more vicious for women, for example. In terms of issues, I try and amplify issues I care about. And let me build on to what Samir was saying about the Black Lives Matter. It's very interesting. When this happened early in the year, there were two responses in India. One was obviously solidarity. And this idea that race matters, and people quickly started pointing out that in the world of business there are so many racist products sold in India, and one of the biggest companies of India sells a cosmetic product called, for almost 3 decades, called Fair and Lovely, and this is worn by everyone around, and this has always been a source of conversation in management schools and so on. But what Black Lives Matter did was it really put this company on the back foot through a social media campaign. And they've not withdrawn the product, but they've changed the name after decades. So I think it's called Glow and Lovely or something now. So it's not really changed the problem, but it really forced them for the first time after decades of what is, I mean, imagine a word like Fair and Lovely, and it's sold in all the shops, and that had to finally give way, even though the product is still there. The other thing people quickly pointed out with Black Lives Matter is that India had our own equivalent in terms of caste-based inequalities. In fact, Isabel Wilkerson's new book is called Caste. And so immediately there was something in India called as Dalit Lives Matter, and Dalits are the erstwhile untouchable, so-called untouchable community. And so there's a lot of solidarity which picked up from Black Lives Matter in the US into India's social media stream with the same Dalit Lives Matter and the same sort of imagery and emoticons, which got a very nice sort of parallel equivalence in India, again amplified by social media. So what I try to do on social media is to amplify these voices, but also kind of point out some of the contradictions, because there is, I think, a narrative of excellence built for certain social groups, certain people of privilege, and often try and point out that this narrative of excellence can be applied to pretty much any community and social group. So I try and sort of latch on to things people say, often recode them, kind of changing their words, but just pointing out that this could apply for practically anything that you're talking about. The last point I'll just mention is I do think academia is a massive echo chamber, and I think I think social media for me is very liberating, though it's extremely toxic. It's also liberating because I actually do follow people who I don't agree with, just to try and understand what they're thinking. It's of course it's painful. Often you want to quickly unfollow these people. But at least some of the leading lights, I try and follow them just to try and understand where these people are coming from. And I've realized that in the last 2 or 3 years, it's actually improved my argumentation skills because I know exactly where these guys are coming from. So when I build my arguments now, it's often saying, I kind of feel I know where the opponent is coming from so that I can engage with them better. And often the positions I was taking earlier could have been wrong or much more naive. And I think it's kind of, these battle lines are slightly better drawn now, precisely because I have access to these views, which I did not have before I was on social media because I was surrounded by people pretty much thinking like myself. So in a very strange way, it's democratic, it's toxic, but it's also a potential window out of a academic echo chamber.
Could I comment on Chimne's last point? I thought that was so
Absolutely
eloquently stated. Thank you. Thank you for bringing that up, Chimne. I agree that a couple of things I learned on social media, even with communities that I thought I was, accurately depicting the life of a Black woman at work, or using the phrase Latinx as a way to be more gender inclusive and non-binary, and realizing that less than 4% of people who identify as Hispanic descent, Latino, Latina descent, like the term Latinx, and it definitely emerged as this echo chamber term. Or even looking at the ways that Black people responded to code switching. So when we put our work out there about code switching at work, most of the responses that I got of disagreement were from other Black people, and I was really shocked. I was like, wait a minute, I thought this was a good thing. I thought I was, having conversations with this group that I identify with, but having it in a different space outside of academia and seeing social media as this conversation starter, it certainly helped me think through all the nuances attached to the work that I've been doing, that we as scholars tend to devalue the perspective of the public in our scholarship. And this was a way to engage with the public in a more informal platform. I've done a Twitter presentation before. It was literally not a video. It was just back and forth, pose a question, here's the response. And that had way more engagement and impressions than any academic journal article I've ever written, right? Because there's people reading it and engaging with the bite-sized content. So I totally agree with you, Chinmay, but I also just wanted to add that it's not just the people who I know disagree with me, it's the people who I thought would agree with me that's also pushing back strongly against the scholarship. So I agree with that completely as one of the unsurprising benefits of social media engagement. Yeah, thank you.
I'd like to jump in also, if that's possible, and kind of build on the point of Courtney, but also Chinmay. You know, the notion that social media is democratic, and on one hand, I think it is. Anyone with the technology and Wi-Fi can open an account. At the same time, I think it's important to recognize that, while we might feel that this is a kind of an open democratic space, there are efforts, to close the space. And in some areas, the space is actually closing. And I think we risk seeing that closing. And beyond the trolls that Angela mentioned, and sometimes these trolls are not individuals, but actually, quite coordinated organizations, and some accusations that states that are behind them or state sponsored. But I won't go there. But at least from the Palestinian perspective, we are seeing Zoom shutting down university events on Palestine. We're seeing Twitter regularly, routinely closing accounts of Palestinian activists and voices, including scholars, and on Facebook as well, groups and scholars and students on activism. And so I think it's also important, while in some areas there has been more openness to discuss and debate issues, and we have an opportunity to celebrate, connect, and collaborate with others. In some respects, there is a closing of space, and that space is not just social media. Social media in many respects is a reflection of what's happening outside. I mean, it's a reflection of our society. Maybe it's not a one-to-one match, but also our institutions. And something I've been tweeting a lot about lately is the effort by UK, European, Canadian, and US governments to push a kind of a new expanded definition of anti-Semitism onto universities, one that equates criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism. We're seeing that that's also having a chilling effect, not only on social media, but also in universities and institutions. And those of us who are aware of these issues on campus know that there's kind of active, there's a lot of contention around this very issue. And just today, Gemma Bolton was, basically suspended from the Labour Party for having, said something in 2018 on social media that equated Israel with as an apartheid state, something that Israeli politicians do on the daily. But saying that in this politicized, polarized context, is kind of, criminalized in that sense. I think so. I think in many respects, that's really something that we should be concerned about, and a little bit different than what Chinmay does. I don't necessarily like to follow people who have totally different views, but my purpose, I don't avoid that, but my purpose is to really seek out racialized experts and expertise. In traditional media, we rarely see racialized subjects representing themselves and their own causes. Look at Middle East experts, Africa experts. They're often not people from the very context, and that's especially the case on Palestine. So what I really try to do is seek out communities of Indigenous journalists, Indigenous scholars, experts on Black activism, and other, Kashmir, Kurdistan, like you name it, Armenia, whatever it might be, but seek out to hear from their voices and perspectives. And that's something that social media, I think, really allows us to do that. And especially on contentious issues, I think the perspective of the racialized that expertise really challenges what mainstream media often ignores in terms of, we talk about the production of expertise in mainstream media, that is often really ignored structurally, institutionally. And that's one thing social media enables us to do, I think.
Thank you very much, Samar. Maybe Angela, I think you want to jump in, and maybe on those issues of power structures and how we can collectively address those and tackle those, and certainly you do have that collective perspective, but maybe you wanted to say something else. So go ahead, Angela.
Thank you. Yeah, I would just want to respond to what folks have said so far, and I'll try to take it in the direction you suggest, Naliwe. Samar, I mean, you were articulating what I was thinking while you were talking at the very end of what you said, and that's thinking about social media as a site of knowledge production. Very clearly, one of the reasons that I use social media in the way that I do and following the people that I do is because I love the way that it allows for the knowledge production of communities that are marginalized by the mainstream. In particular, I'm thinking about, for example, Black Twitter. And the amount of learning that I get every day from critical analysis from some of the people on Black Twitter, I couldn't begin to list them now because I know I wouldn't do justice to the list. But there are so many amazing individuals and thinkers who are not academics, are theorists, social theorists in their own right, who teach us about the nature, the ontology of racial capitalism, who teach us about the dimensions of our society that you would never hear from a mainstream media perspective. And I find it so valuable. And I also find it a place where you can give those people their flowers directly. We always talk about, making sure that people know that they're appreciated while they're here. And so that's a place that you can say, thank you for this thread, thank you for this insight. And it's a nice way to make sure that people are getting acknowledged, because we know that they're not getting paid for that knowledge in any other way. I think it's interesting that the trend has started since kind of, the kind of the fintech innovations have come out where for people to take tips for their knowledge that they share online. So drop your Cash App in the link or in the thread, and people are opening Patreons and all sorts of ways to make sure that there is some exchange happening for the knowledge that is being produced. I also want to talk about it as a site of cultural production. We see lots of amazing creatives of color producing things online, but because of the way that that the social structures of race and capital and exclusion and sexism and all of the intersecting vectors of oppression, how they work, it means that the cultural content that is created by these individuals soon gets co-opted. And I'm thinking of Peaches Monroe, with her catchphrase on fleek that then just turned into, something that was on everybody's shopping bag and, on pencil cases and phone cases. And she didn't receive any credit or any payment for that. And I'm thinking of the young dancers who start dances on TikTok, and it just all of a sudden becomes a cultural trend, a craze, and it just isn't acknowledged. That they're the source of it. At the same time, if you look at YouTube as social media, which I don't think we tend to do a lot, but if you extend the definition a bit, I think it is. The one element that I see of democratization is the possibility of cultural production on YouTube, leading to eventual channels to mainstream platforms. So here I'm thinking of like Issa Rae and Awkward Black Girl that was turned into Insecure, and other web series that wouldn't have ever been given a chance prior to them proving themselves with the social media audience and gaining traction in that way. So that's what I wanted to bring to the table. Naliwe, I don't know if I took it in the direction you're thinking, but that's something about resistance, I think, is the attention and the following that is developed for great creators on social media, and the ways in which that we can celebrate them and try to amplify and uplift them.
Thank you very much, Angela. This is very important insights that you're bringing in. kind of running out of time, so we're going to move to the Q&A a part of this webinar. Unless Chinmay, maybe if you want to have a quick reaction to finish, or if you're comfortable with moving to the next, because we're the last.
Move to the next one.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So I'm handing things over to Vivek and Deborah for the second part of the webinar. Thank you so much.
Hi, there we go. I'm just waiting for my video to turn back on. Thank you so much, panelists. We have some questions from participants here. And the first one that we had in leads really smoothly on from what we just finished talking about, which was about plagiarism on social media, and how we might respond, or our thoughts about how the original authors of tweets, of posts, are sometimes just completely erased from the conversation and not credited at all. But perhaps we could talk about, so the person actually asked, how can we motivate them to keep going? Like, why engage? Why keep engaging if all your stuff keeps getting stolen? So perhaps we could speak to that. Like, what could we do as a community or as individuals to resist this? And perhaps, Angela, you just left off on this point. Would you like to start us off?
Sorry, I'm clicking all the wrong things. The thing that I want to say out loud is that, yes, there is plagiarism on social media. I am going to speculate, although I don't have evidence to back it up, that the Black women creatives that I'm talking about are some of the people who get the most plagiarized. I would venture to say, simply because of the, as I said, the ways in which intersectional structures of oppression work mean that people who are marginalized by race and gender and class, and who are not, who occupy public spaces on their own terms, not on behalf of an organization, are some of the people who we would expect to not be seen as legitimate producers of knowledge. And so when one is seen as an illegitimate producer of knowledge, or not a producer of knowledge, then the speed at which those ideas travel and get changed and transformed, and the credit gets erased is really quite astounding. In terms of encouraging them to continue, I think I don't think it's on necessarily the I don't know if it's the role of the audience to pressurize anyone to continue to create, but as I said, if we can make sure there are some relationships of exchange going on, that helps. If you really like a creator, support them, give them money, open your wallet. Oh, drop something in their Cash App, or support them on Patreon. I mean, I'm not down for, fully commoditizing everything and commodifying everything, but people need to live and they need to eat. And if they can't make money off of the things that they're doing, they'll have to spend their time doing something else.
Thank you, Angela. So I think the next question is from Eric, and he asked me to ask the question, and Chinmay is, I think, can answer this question, because this is more or less like directed at you, in a sense. So you said, you talked about following people that you don't agree with, and so how have you dealt with anti-intellectualism? And Eric says it's one of the reasons why bigger challenges for social media engagement by scholars.
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. I'll probably rephrase it a bit. Personally, I don't like the word intellectual. I think it's a bit self-serving. I see myself as pretty much anybody on Twitter. But I mean, I understand, where the question is coming from. When I've tried to engage with others, firstly, I rarely actually engage with others on Twitter as a first come. In the sense, if somebody is commenting on what I'm saying, then I start the engagement. It's not that I'm going on others' walls and just start sort of writing stuff out there. So I refrain from being the first attacker, so to speak. But if people are engaging, then I do think it's some sort of, at certain level, if it's an interesting sort of discussion of engaging. For example, in India, there's a big thing about the citizenship amendment. And this was directly linked with issues of race and religion. This was and as somebody who works on migration, this was an issue which I thought I could speak on. And it was very tough because this is, again, like most issues today, very polarizing. But they were literally these long drawn out sort of social media battles on this, which kind of end with this idea of, we'll have to agree to disagree. Now, of course, most people on Twitter are not so polite. And so you just have to kind of learn how to ignore and sort of not look at people. But I think over time, you kind of realize that the people who are not, let's call them, the sort of opponents, the ideological opponents, you can, I think, categorize them into two types. One who's kind of beyond the cliff, you really cannot engage at all. But I think there is I think the majority is, a segment where you can engage. And in my experience, there is now a sort of healthy camaraderie with many people on Twitter who are also academics, many of them who hold, very different positions up there. So I'd say, but it's been a long learning curve over the last 5-6 years, where I think I started off very, very juvenile on social media, and some sort of maturity which has come, kind of also know which battles to pick, and not just try and answer to everybody. I think there's also been learning, so when you talk about intellectualism and so on, it really, for me, it's really contributed. A lot of the resources, a lot of the viewpoints, which are really some of the things which I never even have thought of. For the first time I've seen it on social media. So that's how I would, see that.
Thank you, Chinmay. This next question actually chimes with that a little bit, but I'd perhaps like to open the space to Courtney, because you raised this in your introduction. And the question asks, from Salma, for each of your social media experience of hatred, violence, what's your perception of risk and concerns of safety? And I wondered if you'd like to talk a bit more about if your experience and your perceptions have changed over time, or perhaps the ways that you've developed to respond.
Yeah, I guess it has changed a bit over time. I agree with Angela's point that I've been thinking more about the collective. So if I'm posting, it's along a hashtag. So there's thousands of people using this hashtag. It makes it harder to single me out. I also don't have a huge following, so not too worried about the celebrity sort of status of that level of trolling. I've never received, I think we are beyond the days of snail mail type of hatred, but I have received some emails before, and we send them to the IT department and they're able to do a lot of security in that regard. So I do think maybe I am naive in my trust of my institution to sort of handle the trolls that are directed towards me. I have had colleagues where people have, it's clear that they've kind of followed them a bit in their lives, talking about their movement from one institution to another, and that signals you didn't get tenure because you were there for X number of years and now you're here. And so that's a bit more stalker-ish. And for that, they actually did call the police and actually have a more thorough investigation of that level of trolling. So risk-wise, I think part of the mitigation is, for me, Angela, it's been the opposite. I've been adding my colleagues so they can see the evidence of the trolling that I receive. And my dean is actually quite active on my social media. So I remember when I transitioned to this position, I pushed back against the presumptions of the SES of professors. There's a gap between ending a position and starting a position with pay. And I vented my frustrations on one small tweet. I just said, how am I supposed to pay rent in this 2-month gap? And my dean tweeted at me and said, "Oh, we apologize. Do you need a grant to help your transition?" And I was like, "Yes, please. Sorry, did not mean to call you out." But it was also, I guess I'm glad I said something because I did actually need that money. So my dean actually does follow my tweets very well. I don't feel like he's necessarily surveilling me and policing me, but we shall see. As Summer was saying, there might be a point where I do cross the line, and then there will be a different type of backlash. But for now, I have seen having my colleagues, sort of follow me on Twitter as a source of support, that they're able to directly respond to people sometimes when I'm not even aware of different responses, or just promote my work and say, we really value this, scholar, this contributing members who are our university, coming from, higher ups. So it's been an interesting time with assessing risk and engaging with my colleagues in that way.
Thank you, Courtney. I think the next question can be addressed by Samir, and of course others can join as well. It's a very interesting question, and which I often see as well, which is about, a scholar from a marginalized community, an early career scholar especially from a marginalized community, should they hide their identity, or can they expose their activism? Because there may be challenges, the employers may be watching them, and if the employers do not align with their political ideologies, and so how do you navigate such issues?
That's a really important question. And I think a really relevant one. In my own experience, I've been on Twitter just for 3 years, and for almost a full year of that, I wasn't active. And I came to it late in the game, I think prior, because I certainly wouldn't have felt safe. If I was at a North American business school, I don't think I would be as active on Twitter on the issues that I am. If I was someone who was interested in issues around Islamophobia and I was at a French school right now, I think I would be very concerned. And on the issue of Palestine, when we see what happens to even star scholars, even Mark Lamont Hill, when he spoke at the UN on Palestine, a Black American public intellectual, and the backlash, or Stephen Salaita, who basically lost, had a job offer pulled, or even recently at the University of Toronto, Valentina Azanova, an Israeli scholar who's critical of Israel, and there's a scandal now at U of T Law. So I think it's a very real concern. My own, my advice would be, take care and seek a mentor, seek advice, and I think it's important to feel out the context that you're in. You might. I'm at this point where I'm still learning on Twitter. I'm making sense of my own, like, my profile is a secondary concern. I'm making sense of what I can and cannot, or what I should and should not. And I'm willing to deal with whatever consequences. I try to do things respectfully and in an articulate way. And racialized scholars are often the most careful about the language that we use, because we are the first to get buried if we use language that isn't precise. There's a lot of self-censorship. So I would advise, to do be careful and feel things out. And just a quick example, when I was at the Rotterdam School of Management, I was approached by a colleague, actually a Jewish American legal scholar who's done a lot of work on Palestine, Israel, to co-host an event between the business school and the Institute for Social Studies, where we would invite leading figures in the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. We invited a scholar who was actually, worked very closely with Nelson Mandela, was the first commissioner of gender for Farid Isaac in the post-apartheid era. We also invited Omar Barghouti, who was a co-founder of the boycott, divestment movement, boycott, divestment, sanctions movement in Palestine, to have an academic event about, theories of liberation, etc. And I approached my dean, and my dean actually was extremely supportive. And, without having approached my dean ahead of time and have a discussion about the event and that support, when the eventual backlash came, the kind of public backlash and kind of dissenting voices and security trying to shut it down, all the typical things that happen when you try to hold an event on campus on Palestine, the dean stood up and supported the event. And, I don't think that would happen in a North American business school. And if it does, I'll come and speak at it. I'll be pleased. But so I think it's important to feel out, because even in this climate where we are kind of there's a lot of aggression, there's trolls, we feel on edge. We have to be careful, and we should. There are spaces of support and solidarity, and in the end, for the dean, it was an issue of academic freedom. And, and so we went ahead and we had that event, and it was it was a wonderful event. So, but I think it's worthwhile to be cautious and, reach out, touch base with me, touch base with other people who you see doing things that you feel can, and we are always there to support. We understand, and so we are always there to support. That's a really important question, and take care, tread carefully, I think, but, be yourself at the same time. Be true to yourself, speak your truth to power, so.
Angela, I can see your hand up there. Did you want to add something quickly?
Just a very quick point to surround or to underpin what Samara is saying. The polarization of the moment that we feel is not without design. So there is a role for the platforms that have exacerbated our tendencies towards social homophily. There's a role of algorithmic interference in our perception of the other. And I don't know what the solution for that is, but I think it's important that we continue to turn our attention towards the systems that have created this environment in which it is very hard for us to have conversations with each other.
I want to quickly add on to that too, that I think there's questions about the ethics and the role of ethics in technology communities. We've seen this now with Timnit's departure from Google and this firing and this ongoing investigation with this Black woman ethics engineer at Google currently happening, and it's unfolding on social media, right? Like the evidence on either side and people sort of coming with their own verdicts. And we also know these platforms have been used to target, right? It's sort of like how our modern day surveillance systems that have been disproportionately targeting Black and Brown communities for decades, how are they evolving and using this platform as a way to do that as well? And we are not immune to that either. So how can we invest more in ethical infrastructures of digital spaces, I think is going to be key moving forward as a society, and how we as intellectuals can start to bolster those efforts.
Absolutely agree.
Yeah, thank
Sorry,
you.
Chinmay, not intellectuals, us as scholars.
Thank you so much, Samir and Angela and Courtney, and I can see you kind of clicking and echoing each other there. And I think you've all spoken a little bit to a couple of the other questions that were asked on the Q&A as well. And I wonder whether I could bring around the questions to start closing off the session about how we recognize some of these dynamics in interventions we make, and around to the question of the think list itself. As Noliwe suggested when she was introducing, like we had conflicting feelings and discussions ourselves in engaging with it, and whether anyone would like to offer their reflections on how we can and some of the benefits and disadvantages in intervening in particular ways around these dynamics on social media.
Yeah, I think one of the big, powerful things one can do in social media is to be positive and try and inspire. I think often when we keep saying this word polarization and so on, it kind of becomes self-serving, and often there's a negative vibe attached to it. And I think, the way I engage with social media is on balance to convey a positive sort of vibe. That could be celebrating somebody's research papers or somebody's book, not just your colleagues, and in the context of race and so on, especially people who are, who do not share the privileges that I do. And so I think that's really the power of social media, is to give voice for people who otherwise simply don't have access. And so one of the things I definitely try and do is to share the research work, since I'm a researcher, of not only my colleagues, which I do from time to time, but especially of people from some, say, very small towns in India who don't have access to big academy, to people who are writing in languages outside English, for example. Basically people who do not have the same, because I see a lot of privileges that I have as being, an academic. And so I need to, when I'm on social media, to kind of try and spread about some positivity, and maybe it might just inspire certain. So that's the way, you know, I think at the end of the day, I think it is still on balance a fairly powerful medium. And I think, as I said, you need to develop a thick skin. Otherwise, it can be very disappointing and, you know, a very toxic ordeal. Yeah.
Building on that point, I helped to co-found the Women of OB Twitter account. And we started it because there was data coming out about the gender gap in citations in our field. That part of this is that men tend to cite themselves more than women tend to self-cite. But one of the solutions we thought was in this platform, how can we amplify the work of women scholars in our field? And so that Twitter account has multiple users, and we all go in and share praises of the work that women scholars are doing across the gamut of management scholarship. And I have found that space to be quite energizing, you know, supportive, and a way for junior scholars to connect with senior scholars. We identify our Women Crush Wednesday scholars, and just using other things that these digital creators have presented for us to use as scholars. So I highly recommend thinking of creative ways to amplify each other's work as well.
While we have just a moment left, there's two books that I want to amplify for you, following on from your suggestion, Courtney. The first is The Digital Lives of Black Women in Britain by the absolutely brilliant Francesca Sobande. And the second is Glitch Feminism by Legacy Russell. I think that these two texts are kind of indicative of the amount of amazing insight and theory being generated by people who are looking very closely at intersectional approaches to race as well as to tech.
If I get the chance to just close, I'll be very brief. I think initiatives like this really, give us a sense that that it normalizes, professionally normalizes our ability to speak out. I think that's very important. We're not just academics and we work on, issues that are important to us and then we vent. And unlike Chinmay, I do celebrate other people's work and share work quite a lot. And but I also, people might think I'm schizophrenic because the issues we deal with are so heavy, and they can't help but get away from the heaviness. And especially when people's lives are at stake. People are being droned every day and drowning in the Mediterranean every day, and our governments are responsible for helping wage those wars and building walls. So these are heavy issues, but for me, this is kind of the first time I've really had the opportunity to feel that there's a kind of a normalization of this side of me that I used to hide, and I think that's really important. And this if anyone who's listening hasn't yet read the blog statement on this, the Think List Amplify on racialization, it's really beautifully and thoughtfully and carefully crafted. I would recommend anyone to read it. And this notion of celebrate, collaborate, and connect is really fantastic. And so I'd just like to close there, and thanks so much.
Thanks. That's a brilliant point to close. I mean, in fact, you've done my job for me. I mean, I really want to thank you all for a really fantastic conversation. I mean, we've had a series of these Think List conversations when we first started the Think List in a very different form a few years ago, and we always tend to have a conversation around it of this sort. More recently, we've been online, but I think this one has been the one that, out of all of them, has really kind of helped me to think through issues in a really interesting way. I think it's really helping to enlighten us about both the experiences that people have, but also the kind of strategies they use to deal with them, and the broader social and professional problems that we're tackling here. It's been absolutely a fantastic conversation, and to be honest, I've had nothing really to do with it, so which makes it even better. I mean, all the work really has been done by the panelists and by our guest curators who have done such an amazing job. So Vivek, Naliwe, and Deborah, thank you for pulling this together. And what you can't see behind the scenes is Kate Holvey and Alan, our technical guy, who've helped to put things together. So thank you very much to them, but especially to our panelists, Amir, Angela, Chinmay, and Courtney. thank you so much. It's been a terrific conversation. I'd encourage people to, many of our people who are joining us today are on the Think List Amplify, and if you're not, then do take a look, see what's going on. And the point of the list is also to provide a place for people to come together and to build community. I mean, this is one way in which we're doing it, but there are many other ways too. And so we want to carry on these conversations. We want to carry on this amplification. And so when you have ways you want to do that, connect with us, whether online or in real life, please do. And so with that, I'm going to draw it to a close. Thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you for the questions. And I will hopefully see you all again soon, virtually, real life, or perhaps just in some other way. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So much.